Welcome to the HighExistence podcast. I am your host, Jon Brooks. I hope that you are enjoying the episodes that you've been listening to so far. If you do, then please remember to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you have just a minute, leaving a rating or a review on the podcast would be absolutely amazing. Thank you in advance for doing that. Today we are going to be talking to Philippa Wilkin. Philippa is an amazing woman. I first met her on our first HighExistence retreat, Apotheosis, in Costa Rica. Philippa is a transformational breath expert, a coach, and an overall incredible facilitator on spiritual retreats. In this episode, we dive into what is transformational breath. I was at first skeptical, then I tried it and it blew my mind. We're going to be talking about how it works, how you can use it. We're going to be talking about Philippa's backstory from growing up in Essex to traveling to Brazil and finding her purpose as a transformational breath coach. Philippa is someone who really does walk the talk. She lives her mission and is incredibly inspiring for me and pretty much everyone who meets her. So if you don't practice transformational breath, or maybe you don't really know much about breathwork in general, this episode is a must listen. And if you are already familiar with breathwork, then you can just listen to this episode and pick up some extra tips and insights, and of course get inspired by Philippa's amazing energy. With that said, Philippa Wilkin. So I think we should just start with something quite general, and that is, how did you become involved with HighExistence, and how did you end up being a facilitator on our Apotheosis retreats?
Well, where to start? That's a very good question, Jon. So I had been introduced to Martijn Scherp early in 2018, last year, and a friend of mine was working with him on establishing a retreat in the Netherlands, and she actually contacted me, was telling me what was happening, and suggested that she introduced Martijn and I, because she was familiar with the practice that I carry out, or the practice that I'm involved in, which is a type of breath work called transformational breath. And my friend had also experienced breath work herself and felt like it would be a really powerful integration tool for the retreat that they were planning on holding. So that's really where the contact started. And I was invited to take part in the retreat in Holland in April of last year, which was really powerful and really very profound. And following on from that, I went home and I was doing, I guess, my integration practice, and I was meditating. And a number of times I had this vision of being in Costa Rica and sitting upon a platform above a tree canopy meditating. So this came up a few times in my meditation, and I knew that from meeting Martijn at the previous retreat, sharing some breath work, and generally really getting on well, that he was also doing a retreat in Costa Rica called Apotheosis, which piqued my interest, and I was like, okay. So I actually, after having these meditation visions, I reached out to Martijn and asked him if there was any space at the retreat. I said, I think I'm seeing these visions. I think they're Costa Rica. Do you have any space at the retreat? And he said, yeah, I think we do. You should come if you have time. So I said, well, I've just had quite an expensive trip to Holland, so let's see. And then he actually offered me to come and facilitate breathwork and develop a program of breathwork around the itinerary that he had planned for Apotheosis. And I thought to myself, I should really think about that, sleep on it, and then get back to him tomorrow. And I thought, why the hell am I waiting? I'm just going to reply, yes, I'm coming. I don't really know what this involves. I don't really know what I'm going to be doing. I've only known you kind of 3 weeks, but yeah, okay, I'm coming to Costa Rica. Let's discuss it later in the week. So that was really how it all started. And 3.5 weeks after that conversation, I was in Costa Rica, meeting you, Jon, and the rest of the team, and starting on this crazy, wild, wonderful journey with the HighExistence team.
Wow, that's very synchronistic. I want to dive into your experience of apotheosis, but I just want to go back to something you said. So you said that you practice transformational breath. In the spiritual space, there's a lot of talk about different types of breathing. You know, we're familiar with the Wim Hof method. We're familiar with different types of yogic breathing. What is, for people listening, transformational breath? Can you sort of explain what that is and how it works?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. As you say, there are so many different types of breathing, and they can be used really to achieve all kinds of different things. So whether you want to de-stress, whether you want to learn, get to sleep easier, whether you want to increase your performance, all of those things can be achieved by consciously controlling your breathing in some way. Mm-hmm. So whether that, as you say, is Wim Hof or a pranayama technique from the yogic tradition, or whether that's something like transformational breath, we can use different avenues to reach the same kind of goal. So transformational breath is a type of conscious connected breathing. It's a breathing awareness practice, and it's also a breath control practice. So essentially we breathe in what I would describe as a rhythmic, constant way, where we don't pause in between the inhale and the exhale of a breath. So we continue breathing in one continuous loop, essentially. Mm-hmm. And what this does is it can help us to actually tap into altered states within the body and within our psyche. So we can actually use types of breath to almost induce a trance-like state. And this is one of those techniques, effectively. And when we are doing this type of breath work, we call it really the breath work, transformational breath is a breath work of integration. And primarily that is emotional integration. So any unresolved experiences, unprocessed emotions, trauma potentially, we can actually utilize the breath in a focused way to help us overcome and integrate anything that may be troubling us in our life, to become really more expansive and more of who we are, rather than being polarized by any experiences that we might be carrying that are affecting our day-to-day experience, day-to-day reality. So it's a breathing technique using what we describe as a conscious connected breath. So we're controlling the breath. We also use some sound. So this is in the form of vocal expression. Sounds a bit like chanting. Mm-hmm. We also use some movement of the body, which looks a bit like a child having a tantrum, and a few other things in between. But working with intention is the most important thing. So during a ceremony, and that's often how we carry out this work, during a breathwork ceremony, we ask people to set an intention which will guide and help them navigate the session as such.
Right, and typically, the transformational breath creates a sort of like an altered state in the participant, and it's used, as you said, primarily for the purpose of integration, emotional integration. What kind of experiences that people have when they do it. I'm going to share my own experience doing it soon, but I just wanted you to give me your take on, like, what is the primary sort of benefit or result that people get when they do this breath work? Does it apply, for example, to anyone with a problem? Like, is it like very like wide ranging in the amount of scope that it covers, or is it more specific?
Great question. It can have so many different effects on people that it's difficult to quantify. And still, when people come back from or during their session, and when we come back and share at the end, it still never ceases to amaze me what people do share. So the primary, I guess, areas that I'll just delve into a little bit would be, the first is like the physical. So some people can have really quite intense physical sensations, a sense of perhaps energy moving through the body, tingling, tingly fingers and toes, a feeling of lightness potentially, and also possibly some kind of pain. So I give the example, if you have a knee injury or something like that, maybe the energy will shift during the session, and you might feel an intensity of an injury or pain. And likewise, you could feel some kind of sensation that is not representative of any illness or problem, actually. So the way that I see it is, when we start to use our breath in a conscious way, we are getting the mind out of the way. So the body often is taking over and doing what it needs to do to heal itself. So when the mind is out of the way, the body can carry out its normal functions and release whatever is not serving it. So physically, we can have a range of sensations in that sense. Mentally, we can have like lots of peace and relaxation, almost like a state of meditation. We can have thoughts or memories that we've long since forgotten about pop up into our experience. We might have an emotion that comes back to visit, or an emotion that we experience, and that can be with or without a context, a memory, or a thought. Can be just a sensation in the body. And likewise, on the, I guess what we would describe as the spiritual level, people can have a very, very deep state of calm and peace. They might have an out-of-body experience, flying around the world or flying around the universe, or visiting a place that they haven't been for a long time. You name it, anything and everything is possible. And as I say, it never ceases to amaze me, and I love to hear the stories when people come back.
So what you're describing sounds quite like an experience. And I know that a lot of high existence readers, they practice meditation, and I've practiced meditation for years, but I'd never really practiced breath work until I attended one of your classes at Apotheosis. What would you say are the differences between the breath work that you teach and, you know, your average meditation session? Is there much of a difference? And like, how do you see the two as being similar or separate?
I've not really thought about that before. However, I think I would describe breathwork as a more bodily experience. So where, because of the combination of things that we do in a session, we can feel and experience the body at a deeper level. I've not practiced something like Vipassana myself, so it may well be that an experience of that is comparable, although I have had clients of mine that have done many Vipassana retreats tell me that this style of breathwork was the most powerful thing that they have experienced.
Wow.
So yeah. So it's really, I would describe it as more a full body experience. It's physical, it can be emotional, we can have a busy head, you know, lots of thoughts going around, or we can have a very peaceful mind. And often people that have said to me they struggle people that struggle with meditation, for example, have found at the end of a breathwork session that they are in a state of meditation when they've never been able to achieve it or switch their mind off, as they tell me, up until that point.
Right.
So I think one of the things that really helps is working with the body, and moving the energy and the focus into the body can actually help switch the mind into a state of meditation and relaxation without forcing and without too much effort or frustration.
Right. Yeah. Well, I suppose like this would be a good segue for me to tell our listeners about my experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
of the breathwork session. So I came to Costa Rica a couple of weeks after Martijn and Jordan were there, and I think that I was doing something. I can't remember what I was doing, and Jordan had told me that he had a breathwork session with you. Maybe he did it the day before Apotheosis started. Was that right? Was this right? So I came to the retreat and I met Jordan, and Jordan was raving about this breathwork, and I'm skeptical. Like I try to take everything with a pinch of salt. I tried to look at like the science, and I've been meditating for a while, and I know that breathwork has benefits, but I never really thought that, breathing would have like huge, crazy, excuse the pun, transformational like results. So I was listening to him, and Jordan was saying that he did this breathwork and he released a lot of guilt and emotion, and he felt these ecstatic states. And I was like, okay, maybe Jordan just really connects with it. So I thought, I didn't think too much of it. And then I went to your first breathwork session, and I lied down on the yoga mat and followed your instructions, started breathing. And, it felt quite a lot of effort, because I realized I don't breathe properly. I don't really breathe fully. And so that was quite good to see that I could improve how I breathe generally. And then give it like 20 minutes. Suddenly, I started to cry. And I was like, what is going on? And it was the first time in maybe 2 months that I was actually able to connect with the raw emotion of a breakup that I'd had a few months earlier. So like typically when we break up with someone, there's all these other emotions like, our ego is hurt, we feel a bit of resentment, we feel a bit of judgment, we feel like we want to improve ourselves and get rid of the feeling. And I didn't ever allow myself just to feel sad and nothing else until I got down and I started doing the breathwork class, and I cried. And I looked around at the end, and everyone, like not everyone, but many people had cried too. And as someone who has been meditating for years, I've never had an experience like that during meditation. And I don't think you really need like that much science to see that whatever was going on during that session was very healing and therapeutic, because it allowed us to just reconnect with the feelings that are there, but we kind of cover up. And in order to be a more integrated human being, we do need to allow ourselves to feel properly and to be vulnerable. And that breathwork session was crazy, because I was there lying on the floor with maybe 20 other people, maybe a bit more, and we were all in this together, breathing together, releasing together, and it was like a religious sort of mystical experience, really. So I'm totally an advocate of breathwork after that session. And the other thing as well is that it's consistent. It's not a one-off. That those are kind of consistent results, right? Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. It's very much a process, working with the breath, and it meets us wherever we're at with whatever we need. And when I say that, I mean, sometimes our mind is really busy and we have difficulty focusing during a breath session, and the breath will help us carry through that and help us see whatever is in our experience that's actually troubling us. So it might be, okay, the mind is in overdrive now. What's going on there? Or likewise, we might just be really tired, and we go to a breath session and maybe we get more energy, or it's really deeply relaxing and restorative. So it keeps going. It's something that we always have access to. Oxygen is free still, as far as I know, before governments and everything start taxing it or start putting some limitation on it. I heard they do ship fresh mountain air from Canada over to the Chinese cities. This is crazy, but true, apparently.
Wow.
But right? But yeah, it's a free resource that's at our disposal 24/7 that we can use ourselves to understand ourselves better and help us process some of the things that, as you say, get stuck in the body and get stuck in our experience, unresolved.
Absolutely. And I have to ask, you are the first ever teacher of breathwork that I've ever met, and you're extremely skilled at it. And me and the other HighExistence team members, we see you as a true healer. But how did you get into it? Because it's not a typical path that the people. I know you're from. Are you from London originally?
I'm from Essex.
Yes, from Essex. It's not probably the typical path that people from Essex follow, right? So, how did you end up getting into breathwork?
It's not the typical path that people from Essex follow. Absolutely not. So I guess I'll start with a while back. When I was studying, I didn't really ever know what I wanted to do. That question of what do you want to be when you grow up was never really easy for me to answer. When I was a child, I did think, well, it would be quite cool to be an astronaut, but not many people end up in that position, and I didn't really have the drive or determination to follow that through. So I ended up studying a few weird and wonderful things for a while, one being aerospace engineering and then astrophysics, before actually getting a job in London. And that was more because I didn't really care what degree I did. I just thought that the thing to do to be successful, in inverted commas, in society's terms, was to get a job, in the city, in the big smoke, for a decent company, earning good money. So I fell into a job actually as an insurance broker through a contact of my parents, and seemed to do pretty well at it, and I was earning money. And so I just continued on that path, and I got headhunted for a different job and onto the underwriting side. So I started underwriting professional negligence insurance for those of you out there that know what that is. Very, very exciting world of insurance. But I was, in my 20s, and I was earning good money, and I was doing what I thought was expected of me. And up until I was doing that up until 2000 and the end of 2014. So I spent 12 years in the insurance industry. But about 8 or 9 years ago, my seemingly perfect, innocuous life seemed to collapse into a pile of rubble, and a long-term relationship ended, and a best friend was diagnosed with cancer, and I was also doing my professional exams. So it was really the perfect storm after 6 months previously thinking, oh, my life is pretty good right now. And then, catastrophe, or as some might call it, existential crisis struck. So that was, I guess, in 2010. And even at that point, I'd known that there was something more that I wanted to do. I'd often considered a career in nursing or physiotherapy, and thought, well, I'll put it off until, I'm married, or until I have kids, or, there was always a someday, but not right now. And I knew that I wanted to be in the field of helping people. And when my life crisis struck, I really was left with the question of, what is this all about? Why am I here? What should I be doing? What's my purpose? So many questions, very, very little answers, or any answers that did come about just created more questions. You know the drill.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really at that time that I started, I guess, going into my own personal, what I would describe as my own personal process, understanding myself better. I was really unable to deal with my emotions or even know what they were. I'd been a very strong person for a very long time, and that gave me the great ability to deal with many, many things, have a lot of resilience. But it had numbed me out from feeling. And really understanding that was important was a big shift for me. And I started, a couple of years after that, during that process actually, I started yoga and I started meditation. And that was mainly actually to quieten my crazy mind, which was doing loops at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was thrown into this kind of chaotic process. And so yoga and meditation kept me sane for a while, as did my job. And as I went more down that path, I started investigating different modalities. I started with a regular meditation practice, and I started to discover things like breathwork. So 2013, I'd been headhunted for a couple of different jobs in the meantime, since this change was upon me, and moved with the view really of, I'll see how these go, and if I don't like them, then I'm going to move on. Maybe insurance isn't for me anymore. So I had some really good opportunities. I took those jobs, and the last one had a really amazing job for a big American insurance company with my ideal team, getting paid very well, with all the resources that I needed, quite a high-profile job in the industry, really. Certainly for my age that I was. And I think I'd been there about 6 months, and I decided that I would finally get this trip to Brazil that I had intended to do for a while. And so my friend and I, we went to Rio de Janeiro during Carnival in February, I think, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
It was going to be her 30th birthday. And I'd always wanted to go to Brazil. It'd been on my bucket list for a long, long time. And the previous summer when I travelled South America, I didn't get there, so it was pressing. And that trip was fabulous. It was a really amazing trip. It was a beautiful time. We had lots of fun, met lots of amazing people. And I came back to the UK, and there was a part of me that said, you need to move to Brazil. It's like, right. Because that makes a whole heap of sense, right? I need to move to Brazil, so I need to quit my nice cushy corporate life and move to another side of the world, a place that I've only been once, where I don't speak the language. It's really hot. It's culturally so different. It made no sense. But there was a part of me that knew I needed to listen to that voice. And I believe, with hindsight now, I was also going through, some of your readers may be familiar, with a Kundalini awakening. So it's activation of life force energy within the body. So it was quite an expansive time. So I had this thought, I need to move to Brazil. And even before that happened, actually, I'd had a couple of expansive experiences, I would say transcendent experiences in meditation. Being totally connected to everything. That was actually a metta bhavana, loving kindness practice that I was actually doing.
Right.
Just down there was a yurt in the church next to my office in the middle of central London. So I had this transcendental experience. This is even before I found breathwork. And 20 minutes later, I was back in the office. After having been connected with the whole universe, now I'm back sat at my desk with my team. So these kind of things were happening sporadically and randomly, and at no control of mine, and no real desire to achieve them either. It was just, I was just being with whatever was happening, and seeking these different modalities out. Another one that I tried was a practice called Reiki Tummo, where I had a similar experience. And anyway, I backtracked. So I had this message. In a sense, my intuition was saying you need to move to Brazil, and I thought, God, really? But part of me knew that if not now, when? If I don't make a change now, when am I going to do it? And I got to the point where staying in the same place was now more painful than actually taking the risk to try something new. So I guess the price of entry had been reduced. I didn't see it quite as such a challenge. I'd managed to be pretty astute in saving money. I had savings from my job, etc. That if I quit my job, it wasn't going to be such a terrible thing. What then transpired is when about a month or two later, I couldn't quit my job immediately because part of my contract I had a golden handshake which I would need to pay back. So I was sitting in contemplation of this for a few months before I actually made the decision. And in the meantime, I went to a workshop at the festival in London, and it was on my birthday, which is the 26th of May. And it was one of those really dreary bank holiday weekends, which usually occur around my birthday, obviously. And it was chucking down with rain, and I actually went to this event on my own. So I went to this festival on my own. Spent my birthday on my own, interestingly. But I went to this workshop with probably around 40 people, led by a guy called Alan Dolan. And he'd been in the breathwork practice for a number of years. So I went along to a session similar to what I now run, and I had a really lovely experience. And for me, it wasn't really deeply profound, really deeply healing or anything like that, actually, the first time. My experience was really quite physical. So I had a lot of energy, felt like energy sensations moving through my body. I had kind of tingly finger sensation. I had this tightness around my jaw and my mouth, and when we do this technique we breathe through the mouth, and my jaw was so tight I could barely keep my mouth open, so I was constantly fighting with what felt like my jaw muscles to keep my mouth open. But I had this very physical, interesting experiences, and when we shared at the end of the session, other people, like I described before, shared all kinds of weird and wonderful things. How they had had an emotional healing, how they had had an out-of-body experience, how, the list went on, and I thought, this is really interesting. And I knew at that moment that there was something in this for me, and I didn't really know what, but there was just what I would describe as a resonance, a curiosity, that this was something that I needed to pursue, not necessarily as a career at that point, but just for myself, to see where it might lead me. So that was the long and the short version of how I ended up in breathwork.
So what about though the actual training section of it? So what kind of transformation did you yourself go through as a facilitator? Because there's one thing to learn like the principles that make breathwork effective, and then there's another thing entirely to actually heal people who are have had trauma or have got some sort of baggage that they need to let go of. So what was that? That sounds like a kind of a journey in and of itself.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I would say first and foremost is my belief is that we are all our own healers. And that for me means we start with ourselves. And that really was my process with engaging in breathwork. It was for me, it was about me, and it was about my healing journey. And what I found was I'd had talk therapy probably for a couple of years before I found breathwork. And that was really, really great. It really helped me to understand some of my thinking patterns, the way that I think, my actions, and start to have a more, I would say, like bird's eye view of me as Philippa, my personality and my traits and how I cope and deal with the world. What I found with breathwork is that it took that to a new level, in that it was a vehicle to physically process emotions, experiences that were still in my body and in my nervous system, in a way that didn't require me to speak about them, didn't require me to fix or change anything. All it required me to do was be with whatever was happening and to witness it. So the outcome of that for me was I felt much more connected to who I am as a person, having a lot more power and self-belief to express that to the world, and really let go of a lot of things that were holding me back, whether it was my self-judgment, my expectations, or what I believed others thought I should do. When I said my job previously that I went into was based on the fact that, well, I think this is what a successful career looks like. I'd lived a lot of my life, I think, based on other people's expectations, what they thought was either a measure of success, or what, maybe they would have liked to have done for themselves. And it wasn't really true to me. So breathwork really gave me the avenue to come back to myself, to tap in and really understand what I want and what I need, and be able to navigate with the outside world with that in mind as well. Stop hiding, essentially.
Right. And you talked a little bit about some of your belief that everyone is their own healer. How would you say that your approach to growth and self-development is different from maybe the mainstream? What other kind of core principles do you follow when you work with people?
That's a good question. How is it different? Oh, the same. I think one thing in this new paradigm of self-development and healing, in brackets, exclamation marks. I don't even know what I'm talking about now. But healing and personal development, there can be a lot of focus on doing. Create these goals, smash these goals, tear this down, build that up. And what I find in my own personal process, it's a lot more gentler. It's a lot gentler, and at times it can be slower, but it can also be deeper. And what I mean by that is the breath will support you to go at your own pace with your own personal development or personal evolution, or however you want to see it. My work as a facilitator, and I use that word in the context that I help facilitate something for somebody else. If I start calling myself a healer in some of the contexts that are out there, for me that can disempower people in their own lives and on their own journey, because it would then imply that actually I can't do this thing on my own. I need to have somebody to support me or to help me or to do it for me. And I think the problem with that is that it plays into the types of societal structures that we've built in terms of nanny state and people already having their power taken away. My feeling is that actually to raise our level of consciousness, to take responsibility for the way that we show up in the world and to help ourselves and the human race, I guess, heal, is that we all need to take our own personal responsibility for our own journey. And that's why I refer to myself as a facilitator, because I can help you get somewhere and I've got all the tools in the box to be able to do that. But ultimately, I can't make you go somewhere that you don't want to go. I can't get you an outcome that you don't actually want or that you're not connected with. And that's the difference for me. It's like the motivation of somebody that comes, whether for a breathwork session, for a retreat or whatever, they're stepping into their own sovereignty, as far as I see it. You know, we are all sovereign beings. And when we realize that, it can be a bit overwhelming, right? It can be a bit scary. It can be a recognition that maybe we've not been doing our best by our own standards or for ourselves up until that point. And taking responsibility for ourselves is quite an involved process, one that many people aren't prepared to take on. So, yeah, I guess that's, I don't know whether that sums up my philosophy or not, but one of the other things that I work with strongly is, or often, is mirror theory. And how I would describe that is the opportunity to use the world and the experiences in the world as a mirror. So if there's something that we disagree with or we don't like, that's challenging, often, and most of the time, 99% of the time, whatever is happening that is causing an emotional reaction within us is actually a projection from our own psyche. It's a projection of our own beliefs, conditioning, and it's indicating to us that there's a problem in the system. And it's also potentially indicating it to us that we have unresolved emotional charge in our system, whether physically, mentally, whether we're holding on to the past, whether we're holding on to an old hurt, whether we haven't had a conversation that we need to have.
And like, so where did you get a lot of these ideas from? Like, I know the high existence readers love books and love consuming information. Are there any go-to books that have influenced you in this way of thinking about the world and about growth? Any teachers that you were inspired by?
Yes, indeed. I can't think of them all, but certainly one of the things that was really impactful for me when I was just starting on this switch of journey to go and live in Brazil, which I did, was an Alan Watts video. I do really like Alan Watts. It was an Alan Watts video, and it was called, I think, All Retch and No Vomit. And it really summed up in 2 or 3 minutes what I felt my life had become up until that point. So yeah, I'm an avid fan of Alan Watts. I do like some of Osho's books, despite the fact that he might have there might be some questions about some of his practices. I think a lot of his teachings are very relevant. Mm-hmm. One really big impact for me was a book by somebody called Michael Brown, and it's called The Presence Process. Presence as in to be present. And this has really informed a lot of my work about working with resolving emotion. This is a process that you can actually do by yourself. It's actually a breathing exercise and a 10-week self-guided process, similar in a way to Vipassana. where we get guided to sit with whatever experience or emotion is coming up. And I've done this process now probably 4 times over the last 4 years, 3 or 4 years or so. And it's very profound, and a lot of my clients have worked with it and have found the same thing. Very good for resolving old patterns, understanding where these patterns come from. And the key of it is really just to be present in whatever is. And actually, just by that process, we allow experiences to resolve themselves. So the resistance, the pushing away, tends to be what keeps us trapped. Like in the process of the breath work itself or breathing, our response to difficult or challenging situations is often to hold our breath, which then stops the emotion. It stops it in its tracks, really. So that was really powerful for me. I guess I've quite a varied and more experiential path that I've chosen to go down, from a yoga and meditation perspective. The 4 Agreements book, which I'm sure everybody will be familiar with, or the majority of people will be familiar with, is very, very profound for me. I also practice, many of the things that I learned in the process of becoming a transformational breath facilitator still resonate with me. But I also practice another technique, which is called the spiral. And this is a modality based on a number of different things, including spiral dynamics, the Chinese meridian system, the chakra system, a whole host of, I would say, esoteric teachings by somebody that I came into contact with in Australia called Dame Thomas. And there's an interesting book for those of you out there that might be up for something a bit different. It's actually called Clear Your Shit. And it's a Bible for conscious evolution. And it's a great book. It's a short book. It's pretty cheap. But it teaches you a kinesiology-based emotional clearing tool that you can use at home. And I've worked with him this year, over the last 2 years, in fact. And that's deepening my own practice. So, I tend to find that I think there's the proverbial saying, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. That's a good one. I find that very, very much so in my life, just at the point where I need support or I need a different frame of reference, the right people come along.
Those are some really good books, and I'm quite new to a lot of those, so that will be some more books this year added to my list, so thanks.
Yeah. There's also one more, which is Byron Katie, a lady called Byron Katie, who has a book called The Work, amongst others. I mean, there are so many. This is the difficulty, right? There are so many books out there. It's so difficult to choose. Yeah. But her book is really showing us how our thoughts create our experience, and how, with awareness, we can actually change and reprogram those thoughts to give us a different experience. Much in the same way that our breath is also related to our experience, and we can change the way that we breathe to change the way that we show up in life.
Right. And following on from this, I'm just curious, how do you take care of yourself on a daily or weekly basis or monthly basis? What kind of self-care practices do you engage with? Do you like to do to keep yourself functioning optimally?
Great question. And I have to say, even being in the healing field, this is still a challenge. Self-care is, for me, and I think most people that I know, is an ongoing focus, and refinement process and dialing in. What's working for me at the moment is kind of a continued breathwork practice. So even if it's 5-10 minutes a day, where I can wake up or just before I go to bed, and I can practice this technique, and that will really help tune me in, connect with myself. Journaling, whether just free format, free flow, or prompts and questions, I feel can be really, really helpful to understand what's going on, certainly in the subconscious. Dream journaling is something that I've started to do a lot more recently, and again, it's a great avenue into the subconscious. And some of the belief structures and methodologies I have come from people like Jung, and working with the shadow, working and integrating the shadow, working with archetypes, those kinds of things. I've just got back into yoga, which is interesting that I haven't practiced so much over the last few years, but I'm really enjoying that. Any kind of physical bodily practice is really, really necessary for me to stay balanced and grounded. Time out in nature, a good old classic, albeit I'm living in Holland at the moment and the weather isn't so great for that, but getting time out, whether it's in the trees, at the beach, wherever, I find really kind of restorative and balancing. I actually also have weekly therapy, which is therapy, and it's also supervision for my own client work. And I find this is one of the really fundamental and important parts of the puzzle for me, and it has been. I've been working with my coach slash psychotherapist really for the last 2.5 years on a weekly basis, and that really provides me the space to continue to evolve, walk my talk, so to speak, and actually have an outlet for resolving and dealing with the things that are happening in my life or that come up in the course of my practice. And that has also taught me a great deal. She's a wonderful coach and therapist and also facilitator. So I've learnt through the process of working with her a lot of the practices that I now, I guess some of the biases that I have in relation to working with people, but also the ability to work on the retreat, for example, with you guys. So having that space to decompress where it's just mine. Fun, that's the other thing. This all sounds really time consuming and structured, but fun is also a part of that. So making time in my week for things that I enjoy, and one of those is dancing, and that's also a really good embodiment practice, I find. Whatever you like listening to, however you like to move, there are no rights or wrongs, just get out there and dance. Which is actually one of my when we get the opportunity to dance at Apotheosis, it's one of my highlights, absolute highlights, which is quite often. So I'm looking forward to that in a couple of months' time.
Thank you.
It goes on.
I appreciate you acknowledging the difficulty of self-care. As someone who writes a lot about self-care practices, I totally agree that it's. I think if you say that you've figured it all out, then something is definitely not being like, something is being overlooked, because self-care, the things that we need to do to look after ourselves, I think should by definition always be a little bit uncomfortable or a little bit leaning against our edge. It's like going to the gym. You should always probably be increasing the intensity of the workout bit by bit, and the same is true for personal growth, I think, as well. Like we don't want to be complacent in our self-care routines and habits. But
absolutely.
You said I want to talk about Apotheosis, but before that, you said something at the beginning of our conversation about you having a vision about Costa Rica. And I was just curious, like speaking to you personally as well, you've said something like that before as well, where you've had certain visions or certain things have come to you during meditation. How do you make sense of that? What do you think it means when to have some sort of vision about, something that's going to come? How do you think about it?
Yeah, interesting. I did say that, didn't I? Yeah, I find that I've been equally as skeptical about these visions as other people might be. And I think part of that is almost being desensitized to my intuition over time. In the Four Agreements, he talks about being domesticated, by our conditioning and by society and by our parents and everything in between. And that causes us to disconnect from the true nature of what we are, really, and our instincts and our senses. And for me, part of that is intuition. So this has been learning to trust and unravel and interpret my intuition has been a process. And it's an ongoing process. And what tends to happen is the more you trust it and the more you follow it, you develop, it's a virtuous circle. So you then learn to trust it and develop it more. One of the interesting, even before Costa Rica, I was having insights. Some of those were in breathwork, some of them were in meditation. And I was like, that's interesting. And some of them I would say to myself, yes, that's not going to happen. Like, that's a really bad idea. Thank you, intuition, I hear you. Or spirit, or source, or whoever, or crazy mind. However you want to frame it. Thanks, but no thanks. But the first time that this happened in a substantial way was when I was living in Brazil. And just to kind of fill in the gaps between Brazil and now, in a sense, I started my own journey with breathwork. And at the same time, later that year, I did actually quit my job. Mm-hmm. And I spent some time in Brazil. I also spent some time in the US doing my training. And one of the reasons that I was in Brazil, as it transpired with hindsight, was about undoing my Western conditioning. I was living in Rio de Janeiro, and for those of you that have been there, it's a pretty wild, exotic and exciting place. And it's very, very much the other side of the spectrum, the other end of the spectrum to living in the UK. Being quite reserved and quite unemotional and quite stoic, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And the people it can be quite cold, or certainly not forthcoming, a bit more withdrawn. Whereas you go to Brazil and everything is big and colourful and bright, and people can be quite emotional and they can be very expressive, and there's music and there's dancing and there are all these things. So what I realised in that process was that being so reserved and stifled was also had affected my intuition and my ability to tune into myself. So once I started living in Brazil, once I was going more with the flow, so to speak, following these instincts, going along with them, seeing where they ended up, I was becoming more practiced and I was becoming more confident in my ability to trust and know what I wanted. Mm-hmm. One of the visions that I had was in 2015, I think, when I was doing the last part of my training. And what came to me was about running an event in Brazil. In fact, organising the first seminar event, which is a 6-day breathwork intensive. The first one in South America, and organising it in Brazil. I think this came to me, if I remember correctly, in a breathwork session. And I was like, oh wow, that's interesting. And I often go through a process of writing down things that come to me, whether it's in meditation or just in moments.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And it wouldn't go away after this. It wouldn't go away. I was like, oh, geez, I better look into this. So I started, speaking to one of my mentors and one of my teachers about this idea, and they were like, well, yeah, let's make it happen. And I was like, I kept pushing it away. And eventually it wouldn't go away anymore, so I figured I'd better start investigating what this might mean. And that led me one step, after the other, to, in December 16, running a fully fledged 6-day seminar in Brazil, just outside Rio, with one of my teachers for 13 people.
Mm-hmm.
I had, I think, 7 staff that came out to support me, many of them from England, because there's no Transformational Breath Foundation in the in Brazil, sorry. So this was the start of it. And so that vision, that idea, that was just a pinprick of an idea that kind of floated into my awareness, then became a real thing. And it was stressful and it was challenging, and creating an event in a country where you don't really speak the language, you've never done one of these events before, it was all quite overwhelming and quite scary and everything in between.
Yeah.
But it happened. And I feel like that was my thing to deliver to the world at that point in time. And if it wasn't me, it might have been somebody else. But I find with these intuitions or visions, it's like pulling a thread, of a blanket or a jumper or something. You start pulling the thread and the thing unravels, and you don't really quite know where it's going to go. But you kind of keep pulling. And you might get to a dead end. But you might also find yourself at a crossroads where there's an even bigger thread, and it takes you somewhere else. So I think Bill Gates said you can't join the dots together in hindsight. Looking forward, you can only do it in hindsight. And I find that's the case with intuition. The more dots you follow, your path expands and continues and grows. And sometimes the things only make sense looking back. Like knowing that I needed to go and live in Brazil, when the majority of the reaction, to be fair, in my office was, oh wow, the initial reaction from my bosses, oh really? I don't want you to leave. And then in the next breath he was like, but good for you. I would love to do something like that. So then they started offering me a job in Brazil, and I didn't want to stay in the insurance industry. But the point being is that if I hadn't have followed my intuition to leave, despite all the risks, I wouldn't be where I am now, doing what I'm doing now. And, working with you guys on Apotheosis and all of this weird, wonderful, crazy craziness that has come into my life in the last few years from following these threads. So I'm very, very grateful that my intuition seemed to be pretty accurate and pretty in line now.
You have a superhuman level of intuition, basically. I think that's clear, because those visions are, they're pretty incredible and profound. And that also leads us back to Apotheosis, which we haven't covered that much. But I just wanted to get your overall view of Apotheosis. How was it for you the first time we went to Apotheosis in Costa Rica? How did you interpret the experience?
So for me personally, before I went, I was super excited. I was the most excited I think I'd been for a very, very long time. And I didn't know why. I knew it was going to be epic. I just had this sense, the intuition thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I knew I needed to go from the moment that Martin offered me to come. And as it transpired, he shared with me that the other female facilitator that he'd had lined up dropped out the same day that I contacted him. There's a synchronicity for you. And that something was going to unfold. And I had no idea what it was going to be.
Mm.
I don't think any of us did, right?
No one did.
I mean, this was the first retreat, and this was the first high existence retreat, and it was all planned out, but nobody really knew, until we went and did it, what was going to happen. And so I was filled with a lot of anticipation and excitement, and to go to a new country that, despite having done a lot of travel, I haven't been to. So that was also on my list of why I was excited. And then I arrived, and getting there, the retreat centre, as you know, was pretty damn remote, and a little plane with kind of 10 people and into this little landing strip in the middle of the jungle down in the south of Costa Rica, and then travelling an hour and a bit or so in a jeep and an unmade road to get to the retreat centre, right?
Yeah.
A couple of k's from the most amazing national park and all of this abundant, verdant nature. It was quite I don't even know what word I would use to describe it, but awe-inspiring. And that was before the retreat had even started. Just that process of getting there. So I didn't really know what to expect. And that's how I like to live my life quite often, is being open for the possibility that something amazing may or will happen, but not knowing exactly how it's going to transpire. I guess being ready to respond to life. So, meeting the rest of the team, I already knew Martijn, but meeting Jordan and Adam was wonderful. And as you said, we actually did a breathwork session before the participants arrived, and Adam and Jordan hadn't done a session before, and that was really, really deep and profound healing session. And it really paved the way, I think, for the way that the rest of the retreat went. And when everybody arrived, it was like this really exciting, don't know what's coming next moment of the guests arriving, and people from all corners of the world, all, race, religions. It really was just such a mix of abundance and fantastic people that really blew me away. And that in combination with the setting was almost like a kind of fantasy land, really. It was like, is this real? Like knocking on wood to check, like, is this real? So it was, I would say it's been one of the pinnacles of my career to date. From a personal perspective of recognizing that I can do the work that I'm really passionate about and that I love, and that I can support people in their own processes and hold space. And I can also be in these amazing places with this amazing team of, you guys, working with you guys, to really bring a profound shift in human consciousness and the way that we live and the way that we communicate and interact and the way that we perceive each other and nature and this world that we live on. And that was just so unexpected for me. It was so unexpected for me, and I was just full of so much gratitude to have that opportunity and to be there. And miracles, recognizing and understanding and actually experiencing the miracle that is life, and the miracles that are possible for us, each and every one of us, to create in our life, in our experience. The opportunities that we have to change, to heal, to do something differently are endless. And we just need to get clear on what we want. And once we get clear on what we want, and I think that this comes back to the intuition piece, when we get clear on what we want, it's to use some new age speak, but the universe can't not help give it to us. It's like our subconscious mind latches on, it tunes in like a homing missile to identify the things that in our reality that will help us create what we want, or to help us get to the next phase. So if we're conscious and if we're aware of the things that we want to create, the desires that we have in our life, we can then start directing our energy towards them. And that for me was really the culmination of Apotheosis. I knew that this was going to be something very, very important and transformational for me, and it was. But had I not said yes, had I not interpreted my vision, had I not reached out to Martijn, had I not said, actually, yes, I'm coming, at very, very last minute, at short notice, made that leap, not really knowing what I was getting into, then what would have happened?
Well, I mean, yeah, everything worked out like crazy. I mean, the fact that we weren't planning to have a breathwork segment to the retreat until like literally you came. So, and now I cannot imagine Apotheosis without you being there and teaching what you teach. It's breathwork I think of as being the dark horse of Apotheosis. It's people just see breathwork on the itinerary and they just think, okay, cool, breathwork, and then they do it and they're like, oh my god, whoa. And so they end up often citing breathwork as being one of the peak parts of the retreat experience, which is surprising. But when you've done it, it's not surprising, because it's and I do think as well, the thing about breath work as opposed to other types of self-improvement modalities is that I do think you do need some sort of really well structured container and a facilitator like yourself there. I know that it can be adapted to be done on your own, but for me there was something about being there live with you, experiencing all those emotions that would not have been the same if I was completely on my own.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really good point, and I think that speaks to the container that's created with Apotheosis as a whole too. The set and the setting for these types of experiences and the type of facilitation is really important. And that's something always on my mind, as I know it is on your minds as well, to make sure that when we're setting these experiences up, that they are well thought through, that they have a flow, that they have, I guess, an accumulation effect, or the way that people can go through the week, building on experiences, having different experiences, and also finding things that work for them. Coming back to self-care practices, we share a lot of different things, and each Apotheosis is different too. We share so many different practices, and some you might resonate with, and others actually you might not. This is the fun part in my mind, is figuring out what works for you. That's the self-care part. It's like, oh, actually I enjoy doing this, and that fills me up and that gives me energy. I think we can go down a road sometimes with self-care, and I can do this myself. It's like, well, I should do this and this and this and this and this. Mm-hmm. And it becomes more like a task list, a checklist. And, if I haven't done those things, I've failed. Well, actually, maybe you don't feel like doing those things. Maybe you don't really want to go for a walk when it's raining. Maybe, rather than a half an hour seated meditation, you can do a 10-minute guided yoga nidra type meditation. And that's actually what your body needs. So this is what I like about the format or the framework that we've created, and the space that we've created for these retreats, is that there's so much flexibility, but there's also the core elements. And as you say, for me, breathwork is one of those real core elements to bring all of those different experiences together and help integrate them.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think that there's only really one way to experience breath work firsthand the way that I've experienced it, and that is to work with you in Apotheosis. I know you also work with Synthesis with Martine's company, but Apotheosis is more aligned with the HighExistence ethos. So if anyone listening to this is interested in breathwork and working with Philippa and the rest of the HighExistence team, experiencing breathwork and all the other things we teach, then you can check out apotheosisretreat.com, and there'll be also links in the show notes that you can check out and learn more. And Philippa, obviously we've just started now at the time of recording a new year. Do you have any personal goals or missions that are exciting you this year that you're gonna look forward to getting your teeth into?
Oh, that's a great question, Jon. One thing that has come back, this is on the visions list. One of the visions that I've been, let's say, ignoring or pushing down for the last couple of years, in all honesty, is creating a retreat center in Brazil.
Wow.
And I say that and I intake breath.
Yeah. That's epic.
I'm not sure if that's gonna happen this year, but getting myself on board with the fact that this is one of my longer term aspirations is new and novel. So that also 2019 for me, I think, is about consistency. It's about the physical body, actually, and making sure that I'm fit and healthy and fit for service, to really give everything my best, to show up as my best self. So that's really my focus, I think, is how do I show up as my best self? And that's going to be asking myself that every day. What is required for me to be able to do that, and actually move away from the things that aren't helping, that aren't assisting, that aren't guiding me in that direction, and moving towards the things that really are. So, yeah. What about you, Jon?
For me, well, I've been doing, for people listening, after the Apotheosis retreat, we do a mastermind, and we check in weekly to help with our integration, the people who choose to do it. And I've been doing a mastermind led by Philippa, and we've been discussing each week the things that we're working on, our intentions. And when you asked me that, I just thought of the last mastermind we did a few days ago. For me, this year, I think this year is going to be the... I think this year is going to be a very significant year. Last year, 2018, for me, was a wild ride, where I had some of the worst experiences of my life and some of the absolute greatest experiences of my life. And it was just an incredible movie-like, surreal, psychedelic experience. And this year, 2019, the key word for me is going to be discipline. Discipline to do the right thing, discipline to take care of myself, discipline to read the right books, discipline to train in the way that I want to train, discipline to work on the projects that I want to work on, discipline to be the person that I want to be. So I'm getting organized, and I want to really feel like by the end of 2019 that I've achieved the things that I've set out to achieve. So there's nothing too crazy for me, or too epic right now that's come to mind, but it's getting everything organized and set up right so that I can function as well as I can. And I want to stop doing the things that I know I shouldn't be doing, and just be more focused and disciplined and use my time more effectively. But I typically say that every year. But this year I really feel like the 2018 for me with the 2 Apotheosis retreats and meeting you and Adam and spending time with like really high I don't know how to describe it, like people who I consider to be like awake and conscious. It's inspiring, and 2019 is going to be the year that I get that much closer to my potential. And I'm 29 now, so it's cool because I'm going to be 30 in a year, and yeah, I'm excited. So that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. You've just got one more year, and then, you know, by the time you're 30, you'll be self-actualized, Jon.
Yes, so I've got a lot of work to do, but I am going to be totally self-actualized in 12 months.
Fabulous.
So this has been like a really great conversation. Where can people learn more about you if they just want to find out, you know, what you're up to and want to connect with you?
So my brand, I guess, is called BREATHWORKS. So the theory being that it does what it says on the tin, you know, breath does the work. So my website is www.breathworks with an s.co. So you can find me over there, hit contact, send me a message. I'm also on Instagram as breath_works with an s. So those are the main places. I'm on Facebook as well as BREATHWORKS. Or awesome. You can find me as Philippa Wilkin. And also, if you want to get in touch with the High Existence team, they can put you to me too.
Yes, and so I'm going to link to everything that you've just mentioned in the article that comes with this podcast. And just for people who are listening, we will be doing soon, as a little taster, some coaching services available for people who do want to work one-on-one with the Apotheosis facilitators. The response so far has been really, really amazing on the retreat, and we feel like it's the time now to start offering that on the site too. But it's going to be done in a very low-key way. So if you are listening to this and Philippa's story resonates with you at all, then you can also feel free to message us at HighExistence. You can message us at team@highexistence.com, and yeah, we can give you more details on that. So yeah, amazing. Thank you for your time, Philippa. It's been really great learning more about you and getting to know you better. And yeah, you've given me some good inspiration for the week ahead. Thank you.
Oh, and thank you for having me as part of the team. It's an absolute joy, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in a few weeks' time in Costa Rica, and perhaps some of the wonderful people that are listening to this podcast will be there too. So I look forward to meeting some of you in the future.
Yes. Oh, and by the way, on that note, there are, I think, at the time of recording, I think maybe 3 or 4 spaces left for Apotheosis 3.0, which is happening toward the end of February, and there is Apotheosis 4.0, which is also in Costa Rica in June, but I'm going to provide all of the details in the show notes, so if you're interested, just check out the show notes, and you can apply. So thank you, Philippa. Speak soon. Thank you so much for listening to the High Existence podcast. Once again, if you loved this episode and want to never miss a future one, then just subscribe. If you want to support this podcast, you can go to patreon.com/highexistence, or alternatively, you could leave a review or rating on this podcast. I will be seeing you again soon. Until next time.